Tragedy at Brazilian Zoo. Young man killed after entering Lioness Enclosure, driven by lifelong obsession. A devastating incident unfolded at zoo in João Pessoa, northeast Brazil, where a 19-year-old man, Gerson Machado, was mauled to death by a lioness after climbing into her enclosure in front of shocked family and visitors. Now let's go deeper and see what really happening in this story.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're starting today with a headline that is, well, it's just instantly shocking and profoundly tragic.
It really is.
A 19-year-old man, Gerson Machado, was killed by a lioness after he deliberately climbed into her enclosure. This was at a zoo in João Pessoa in northeastern Brazil.
And, on the surface, this just reads like a simple, awful failure of judgment.
Right. A terrible mistake.
But what's so fascinating here is that while the incident itself seems straightforward, if you just read that initial flash news, you miss the critical complex context.
And that's why we're doing this deep dive.
Exactly. The sources reveal this wasn't just recklessness. It was a devastating convergence of extreme poverty, severe mental health struggles, and this dangerous, almost mythical obsession with wild animals that ultimately turned fatal.
So our mission today is to move far beyond just the sensational facts and really try to understand the profound boundaries, both physical and emotional, that were crossed here.
It's a haunting story. It kind of holds up a mirror to how intense, unfulfilled human desire, especially when it's coupled with a lack of social support, can really set the stage for a terrible and maybe predictable tragedy.
So let's start with the hard facts. What actually happened at the Aruda Camera Park, which I guess is locally known as Bica Zoo?
Yeah, and to really grasp the level of desperation here, you have to look at the sheer logistics of the breach.
This wasn't a case of accidentally stumbling over a small barrier or...
No, not at all. You can't accidentally climb a 20-foot wall.
A 20-foot wall?
Exactly. That's what the city officials investigating the event confirmed. Gerson Machado, who was just 19, he didn't just bypass security. He meticulously circumvented, industrial-level safeguards.
So that 20-foot wall, that requires planning, time, immense physical effort. It really speaks volumes about his intent.
It speaks to absolute desperation. And once he cleared that wall, he wasn't even on the ground yet. He then used a tree that was growing inside the enclosure to climb down into the lioness's habitat.
So a full, high-risk infiltration.
Completely. And once he was down, everything just moved with terrifying speed. We know there were horrified visitors who actually witnessed the attack unfold.
And zoo staff, security guards, they realized what was happening, but they were simply too late to intervene.
Just too late. The animal, acting purely and instantly on territorial instinct, attacked as soon as he breached her space on the ground.
So what about the professional response? The veterinarian's take on this.
Well, that's also very telling. The zoo veterinarian, Tiago Neri, he confirmed that the lioness was contained almost immediately. And importantly, without using tranquilizers or weapons, she actually responded to commands and went back to her pen.
That's interesting. What did he say about her state?
He specifically noted that the animal appeared stressed and in shock after the incident. That's a really significant detail.
It suggests a rapid, unnatural intrusion into her world, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So João Pessoa City Hall confirmed the tragedy and they closed the park. And it's a massive park, something like 26 hectares with over 580 species, for a full investigation.
But this is where the whole focus really shifts, from just a safety failure to a human tragedy.
Right. Because police made it clear almost right away that they haven't ruled out the possibility that Gerson's actions were a deliberate form of suicide.
And that perspective is based on his known history of emotional distress and, previous dangerous behavior.
It just raises this immediate critical question. Was he trying to achieve a dangerous dream, or was he seeking a definitive end to his pain? The facts of the breach, the sheer effort it took to climb that wall. It suggests a profound commitment to entering that space no matter what.
Okay, so we understand the terrifying logistics, but to really get the why, we have to go back and understand who Gerson Machado actually was.
Yes. The sources paint this deeply moving but also really disturbing picture of a troubled dreamer with this tragic, all-consuming obsession.
So his background, what do we know?
The background sources reveal a devastating portrait that just explains so much of that desperation we were talking about. Gerson didn't have a safety net. He grew up in extreme poverty, and he spent most of his life in the Brazilian state care system.
He was struggling with his mental health?
Severely.
Yeah.
He was suffering from severe documented mental health issues. His entire foundation was just unstable.
Inherently so.
Yeah. A child protection worker, Veronica Oliveira, who had supported him for 8 years, she detailed a life filled with just profound hardship and emotional instability.
And what about his family situation?
His mother had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, which meant the family was continually struggling under the weight of severe mental illness and just grinding poverty.
That dual weight,
Mhm.
mental illness and absolute lack of money, that creates an impossibly difficult environment for a child.
It does. And the source material explicitly uses the language of neglect, saying that Gerson suffered violations of his rights just because of his difficult and unprotected circumstances.
And there was something about his siblings too, right?
Yes, and this really stands out to me. He had siblings, but because of Gerson's own very pronounced behavioral and emotional challenges, he was the only one of the siblings who was never adopted.
Wow. That must have been the ultimate form of isolation. A daily reminder that he was different, too challenging, or just left behind.
How do you process that kind of rejection as a young man? Probably you don't. Not in a healthy way without professional help, which he clearly lacked consistently.
So he channeled all of that into something else.
He channeled that profound emotional intensity, that isolation, that feeling of being an outcast into one singular, all-consuming ambition, the dream of going to Africa to train lions.
So it became his fixation.
It was his deeply romanticized fantasy, a pathway out of his agonizing reality. In his mind, I think the untamed wild represented something controllable, something that might finally accept him.
So this obsession wasn't just a quirky interest. It was the only coping mechanism he had for a world that had, continually rejected him.
Exactly. It was a projection of his need for connection, for mastery, for agency, all the things he completely lacked in his life. The whole lion tamer idea gave him a fantasy of power and acceptance that he desperately, desperately needed.
Let's dive deeper into that fixation, because the sources show this dream didn't just stay in his head.
No, it drove a repeated, escalating pattern of genuinely dangerous, high-risk behavior that led directly to this tragedy.
He'd tried to breach security before, right, in other attempts to get close to big cats.
Yes. What makes Gerson's story so chilling is that the zoo breach was really just the final step in a clear, documented trajectory of self-harming behavior, all of it driven by this obsession.
We have to talk about the airport incident, because that's such a chilling precursor. It shows the extent he was willing to go to.
It's a testament to the sheer desperation we're talking about. Gerson was caught by airport security after he had physically cut through a perimeter fence.
And then what?
He then managed to hide himself inside the landing gear compartment of a Gulf Airlines plane.
No.
He fundamentally believed this was a viable way to fly to Africa and start his new life as a lion tamer.
The logistics of that alone, cutting through a secured fence, getting into the wheel well of a commercial jet, that's just astonishing. It's like something out of a movie, but it was a real-life, desperate gamble.
It was an act of delusion so powerful it overcame his survival instinct. I mean, this wasn't a casual risk. This was a high-stakes, almost guaranteed fatal attempt to escape his circumstances.
And Veronica Oliveira, the social worker, what was her reflection on that moment?
She captured the relief and the dread perfectly. She said, "I thanked God when the airport called to say they had found him before a tragedy happened."
But the tragedy was just postponed, really.
It seems so. This fixation, this repeated pushing against every single barrier, physical and existential, it just shows that Gerson was on an irreversible path. He saw safety barriers, whether it was a zoo fence or airport security, not as protections, but just as temporary obstacles to his impossible goal.
And Oliveira's final reflection on him, it really summarizes the crushing reality that he tragically missed.
It does. She concluded that Gerson's story was one of a boy who just wanted to fulfill this powerful, romanticized dream. But she notes, he discovered too late that lions are not domestic cats, and without the right knowledge, that dream can turn fatal.
It just underscores that conflict, doesn't it, between a powerful human desire to master nature and the absolute non-negotiable reality of wild instinct.
He mistook the wild for a forgiving sanctuary, and it wasn't.
This is where we need to shift focus, from the individual tragedy of Gerson Machado to the broader implications, for public safety and, crucially, for wildlife ethics.
Absolutely. This incident, while it was driven by Gerson's profound internal pain, it really exposed a critical failure of boundaries. And that failure always carries a cost.
So the public reaction was complex, I imagine.
It was. You had sympathy for the boy, of course, but also real concern for the lioness. And important figures spoke out to contextualize the lioness's actions.
Right, and we need to look at the perspective of this Brazilian politician and former environmental protection chief, Matheus Loyola.
His analysis is essential for framing the ethical side of this. Loyola's message was really grounded. both scientifically and ethically. He explained that a lioness did exactly what a lioness is biologically programmed to do.
She acted on instinct.
Purely on instinct and self-defense when her enclosure, her territory, was invaded by an unpredictable factor. His point wasn't about the boy's intent, but about the action itself.
The action of crossing the boundary.
Exactly. Tragedy happens when humans willfully ignore safety barriers. It risks human lives and, perhaps most unjustly, the animal's life.
And that's the unspoken tragedy in these events, isn't it? So often the animal, who's just following its nature, is the one that ends up paying the ultimate price, sometimes through euthanasia.
Precisely. Loyola stressed that respecting wildlife isn't negotiable. It's a foundational rule. And then he offered this really provocative conclusion that forces you, the listener, to reflect.
What did he say?
He said, when this boundary is ignored, it is always the animal that suffers. Who then was the real animal in this situation?
Wow, that is a stunning piece of rhetoric. It forces you to redefine animal not by species, but by behavior.
Yes, why does he turn that back on the human? Because the lioness operated strictly within the rules of nature and the boundaries of her enclosure. The human, Gerson, had the cognitive ability to understand the risk, the warning signs, the physical barriers, yet he willfully violated every single one.
So Loyola is suggesting that the violation of established order, the disregard for self-preservation, is the truly untamed or animalistic act here.
It's a powerful point, and it connects back to Gerson's whole life, where he continually pushed against all social and safety boundaries because of his distress.
The story just serves as this haunting reminder of the incredibly thin, non-negotiable line that exists between our fascination with the wild and the absolute fatality that happens when that line is crossed. The dream of taming the wild has to defer to the reality of instinct. So what does this all mean? We started with a shocking headline in João Pessoa, but we've learned this was so far from a simple act of teenage recklessness.
It really was. This story just encapsulates the complexity of Gerson's life, marked by poverty, severe mental illness, a deeply misunderstood passion, all of it pitted against the absolute unyielding reality of wildlife instincts and physical boundaries.
We tracked his life through extreme hardship in the state care system. We saw his dangerous fixation play out through repeated breaches, from hiding in the landing gear of a jet to finally scaling the high walls of that zoo.
It was a life spent continually chasing an unattainable and ultimately a lethal dream.
And this raises a really important question for you to consider as you reflect on this deep dive. Given Gerson's documented history of mental distress, his profound isolation, and those repeated high-risk attempts to breach security barriers, both societal and physical, how much does society's inability to recognize and effectively intervene in severe mental health crises factor into tragedies that we often just dismiss as human error, or a failure of zoo security?
And what does Gerson's tragic end, pursuing an impossible romanticized dream within the artificial confines of a zoo? What does that say about the boundaries we failed to enforce? The physical barrier failed, yes, but maybe the greater failure was the lack of an effective emotional barrier, a functional support system, to protect a troubled young man from the destructive power of his own fixation. The unfulfilled dream was lethal, but the social void, that was the true catalyst. Think about the responsibility we share in identifying the quiet desperation that drives such public final acts.
Well, this is a very sad news. Okay, one question for you. How much responsibility lies with the zoo for preventing such incidents, even when someone deliberately breaches security? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.